What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
On America Trends, oftentimes we're dealing with things that are really tough and somewhat disappointing when we talk about the boy crisis in America, opioids, whatever it may be. But we've got a hopeful story today. I'm Larry Rifkin along with John Kropsic. And John, I know that we hear an awful lot about African American men in our society, and we wonder how they're doing. We hear that they are disproportionately imprisoned and perhaps without father. But we have a really wonderful story today that is emerging through some very serious research being done by the Institute for Family Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. And the title of this report, John, is Black Men Making It in America, the Engines of Economic Success for Black Men in America.
Well, I think that's great. That's great news because you're right. There's a lot of bad news about what's going on in the black community. So I think if we can bring a positive story here, that's just wonderful.
And we know that there is an enduring quality to this racial inequality issue in America, and it has been going on for a long time, and we continue to work at it. Unquestionably, we've done better in the recent period, though we've seen a lot of exceptions in terms of cases like Ferguson and Baltimore and Charleston. But having said that, let's look for the silver lining here, John.
Well, I also think that at least it seems as though the millennials are a little more accepting than maybe our
and color
generation
means
was.
less
Yes,
to them.
Yes. So that, this is all a good thing if that's true.
Well, it is, and there is a set of data that's telling us that the economic fortunes of black men in America really is improving, that the share of black men who have reached the middle class is growing, that there are some engines of economic success that black men in America are experiencing today, and that many are staying out of prison and that prison industrial complex that has been built here in the United States, and also that the military, that marriage, and the black church have really been engines for a lot of this. So I think it's a great survey. I think it's a great study, and I think it's going to offer people a thought process into this issue that I don't think they're hearing in many places.
No, I haven't heard this news, so this is breaking news.
Well, in a sense, but it is a trend, and that's what we like to bring to you. Things that may not be reported on the front pages, things that are not involved in the helter-skelter of today's wild politics in America, that you've got to look at things that are developing and emerging over a long sweep of time. And I think many of us have been concerned. Is Black America going to be able to buy the housing that they want to buy in neighborhoods that have been previously exclusive and unavailable to them? And I think there are some really hopeful signs in this report, Black Men Making It in America. You want to hear more about it?
Let's hear it.
All right. Bradford Wilcox did this report along with Wendy R. Wang and Ronald Mincy, and he is with us today, Mr. Wilcox, on America Trends. With us on the line is Brad Wilcox from the American Enterprise Institute. He's a sociologist, and he's involved in a study called Black Men Are Making It in America. And as you point out, there's been a lot of sobering and even depressing news over the recent period about gains that African American men may have been making over time. But you tell us that the story may be a little bit brighter than we think.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to recognize that, today most African-American men will not be incarcerated. Most black men are not poor. Most black men are not unemployed. And to put that obviously in more positive lines, what we're seeing is that a majority of black men are in the middle upper class in America today. And that's up markedly since the 1960s.
But Brad, we read often where there's such a disparity between white men and white women and black women, and so that's what we generally internalize.
Well, it is true that African American men are not doing as well as Asian American and white men when it comes to income in America. There's no doubt about that. And there is a racial gap, income and assets and incarceration. And I don't want to minimize, that reality, but I also don't want to minimize the fact that there are plenty of black men who are flourishing financially in America today, and that, there are more black men in the middle class, upper class, than there are black men in poverty. And so when we're thinking about the kinds of messages we're sending to the population at large, the kinds of messages we're sending to black boys about sort of our country and where we're at today, it's important for people not to lose sight of the fact that there are lots of black men who are flourishing, and that I think has implications for how, for instance, police officers might treat, black motorists. It has implications for how black adolescents in high school might think about their own, professional future. And so highlighting kind of some of the positive character of what's happening with black men in America, I think, can be helpful in both reducing discrimination and also giving especially young black males a sense of hope for their own future.
That's a great point, because we only do hear about some of the difficult stories, or we do see that there are those in entertainment and sports, but we sometimes limit our thinking to some of the things that are emphasized in the media today. So give us a rounder picture of what's going on with men achieving the middle class from the black community.
Well, just to kind of also give you an example here of what we're talking about, I think most people, myself included, when you mention the name Michael Brown, think immediately of the young black man who was killed in a confrontation with a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. And the vast majority of people who know of that Michael Brown don't know the Michael Brown in Houston, who got, I think, more than 15 college acceptances last year.
Oh, I saw that story, yeah.
Yeah, to Stanford. So, I mean, the point I'm making here, part is that we can't lose sight of the fact that, again, that there are plenty of young black males, plenty of black males, who are doing well in school or well in the marketplace, and we should be, paying them more attention. But to your question more specifically, what we find in this report is that there are a number of routes that black men are taking into the middle class and into the upper class in America today. And those routes include often, more education, full-time work, marriage, military service in particular. And so those are some of the routes that black men have taken in the last half century and are still taking today to get into the middle class or get into the upper class.
What do you find about intact families, upbringing? We always go back to our childhood today, looking for clues as to why things went well or went wrong. Where does that particular piece fall?
Well, one of the surprising things about this report, basically, is that we did not find a strong story here for black men's individual family structure. But it's important to note that, other research that's come out recently has found that black boys who are in neighborhoods that have more fathers and actually even more married adults are more likely to be flourishing financially, in midlife. So although we didn't find that particular story in this particular study, there is research out there indicating that kind of black boys who are growing up in neighborhoods with more fathers and neighborhoods with more married people, more likely to be doing well economically. So it suggests that what happens kind of in the family doesn't just matter for one's own kids, so to speak, but also for your community as well.
So you talked about education, you talked about work, the military, marriage. What about the black church?
We also find, too, that black men who were engaged in the churches, young men, are more likely to be flourishing financially in their 50s. We don't know precisely, what the story there is, although we also find that those black men are more likely to get married. But I think what the black church does in part is promote what has been called a code of decency for its members, including its black males, which encompasses things like law-abiding behavior, hard work, responsibility, and all of these things are obviously linked to kind of how well black men are going to do long term when it comes to financial welfare.
In your report, Black Men Making It in America, you also talk about the importance of what you call, and I know a lot of people use this term, agency, individual agency. Put a definition on that.
Well, what we looked at in this particular study is sort of whether or not people, whether or not young men, had a sense that they were kind of a captain of their own fate, whether they, had the sense that they were in control of their lives versus being kind of subject to fate or to larger external forces. And what our results indicate is that young Black men who had a stronger sense that they were, in control of their lives, in their late teens and 20s, were much more likely to be doing well financially in their 50s. And that's even after controlling for things like their education, their marital status, their religiosity. So something about having that sense of agency at a young age was linked to better financial outcomes 30 years later. It's pretty striking. And so I think it could be tapping in part, personality traits that kind of are enduring. There's some people we all know in our social networks who are just kind of go-get-em guys, and those guys are going to just, on average, do better. That's true for African Americans as for others. But I think there's also kind of a way in which this might be tapping to a sense of your hope for yourself. Your sense that you have a future. And so I think particularly for African American males, it sort of brings us back to this idea that inculcating this idea that you can take steps that will, increase your odds of realizing the American dream is important. And so we are showing you the steps that it can take. Obviously, are things like education, full-time work, marriage, military service. But these kinds of steps are associated with better financial well-being later in life.
You talk about individual agency, but how important is it to have these role models who come back and really want to mentor young Black males? And is that going on because somebody might leave the community itself because they've been successful, but do they come back to help? Is that an important piece?
Yeah, I think it is. There's pretty good evidence today that young Black males are more likely to flourish when they've had exposure to a Black teacher, a Black mentor. There's even evidence, too, that Black males are more likely to follow the medical advice of Black male doctors. So I think it's important for successful Black males to be thinking about ways that they can take their story, their experience, and their wisdom and share it with other younger Black males, either in their family, in their neighborhood, or across town, so to speak.
So in this report, we're finding that Black men have really risen, many out of poverty. I think today it's about 57% are in the middle class or higher, and that's really good to know. You talk about the key institutions that you want them to touch in very positive ways, education, work. But one area where we don't want Black men to contact and be involved with is the criminal justice system. How important is it to stay away from that? And we find in our society it's very difficult for young Black males to avoid it. They have to take really precautious measures to make certain that they are not coming into contact with the law often.
Yeah, so we do find that young Black males are more likely to have contact with the police than white, young males. Although in our study, it was still a minority, who had some contact with the police, negative contact with the police. And for those who did, they were much more likely to be in financial trouble later in life. And so, we don't know obviously the exact order of causality here. It could be that young Black males who, got mistreated by the police experienced a kind of downward spiral in the wake of that. Or it could be that the kinds of young Black males who were getting in trouble with the police were less likely to go on to be gainfully employed for reasons related to, their earlier behavior and orientation. But I think your point is the correct one, and that is that, it's pretty clear that young Black males need to be careful to avoid peers and situations that would put them at risk of being arrested. And then on the flip side, we also talked to you about research indicating that the criminal justice system is more likely to treat young Black males in a more negative way, even kind of given similar offenses to, say, young white males. And so I think from a more of a structural perspective, we need to think about ways to encourage police officers prosecutors, judges, and lawmakers to make sure that our policies and our criminal justice system are treating young black males in a just way. That is a way that's appropriate to whatever crime may have been committed vis-a-vis other young men in the system.
And of course, we're talking here about perceptions, and thus it's important to get out some of the information that you have included in the study, Black Men Making It in America. And you give us some advice going forward as to some of the things we should do, including the fact that we need to reduce racial profiling and over-incarceration in the criminal justice system. You also suggest that a lot of this movement toward greater efforts in early childhood education are important to continue.
So we're seeing, for instance, with nurse-parent partnerships that are being tried and used across the country, that lower-income parents, often single mothers, many of whom would be racial and ethnic minorities, including mothers of young black boys, benefit from having nurses come and engage them about how to be a more affectionate, a more engaged, and a more authoritative parent. And so, these parents feel empowered. They get some skills when it comes to parenting that they didn't have before, and their kids are more likely to be flourishing both academically, emotionally, and socially later in life in the wake of these kinds of programs. So that would be kind of an example of how helping either parents or kids, especially in lower income families, may pay longer term dividends for kids in general and for African American boys in particular.
You also say that when it comes to college, which is clearly a benefit to black males, that we need to increase the pipeline of black men into higher education. Now, I know there was a ruling by the Supreme Court recently about affirmative action in admission policies. What needs to be done in that realm?
Well, I think that there are kind of two different points to make here. One is that we need to be thinking about programs that serve all disadvantaged kids, be they black, white, Hispanic, Asian American, or Native American. And obviously, if you're coming from a family where there's no history of college education, for instance, college can be a pretty daunting undertaking. And so thinking about programs in middle school and high school and then at college to help kids from lower SES backgrounds make it into college in the first place and then successfully stay in college in the second place. I think the more provocative point I would make here is that, again, I think there's some evidence to suggest that African-American children, including black boys, are more likely to be flourishing in school when they are exposed to teachers and mentors of the same race. And that could be true across the board. I don't know. So I think there is a place for programs that are, run by, in this case, black males that are serving, black boys in middle school and high school and college, improve their academic skills, their knowledge, and their competence.
Well, the report is called Black Men Making It in America, the Engines of Economic Success for Black Men in America. Brad Wilcox has been with us. He's one of the co-authors, along with Wendy Wang and Ronald Mincy from the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you for joining us today on America Trends.
It's my pleasure to be with you today.